Hi, everyone. So at the end of this month, end of July, CAST is going to be launching their updated, revised UDL guidelines 3.0. And after reading through the proposed changes, the summary, the considerations, the rationale behind some of the suggestions for proposed updates, here are four things. Four things that I'm excited about. The first thing is that there will be an emphasis on the who, or the identity of students and learners as part of variability, identity as part of variability, alongside the why and the how and the what, or the engagement, the representation, and then the action and expression. Why is this important? Well, it asks us to each look at our own jaggedness as learners or as educators, looking at our assets and our variability or our areas of needed support, and think about how we might remove those barriers and how students' assets lend themselves to collaboration, collective learning, and it really brings intentionality to our planning, our assessment, our teaching, our learning, and our classroom environment, which ultimately then supports the culture of the classroom and our school. The second thing, here we go. So, of those four things, the second thing is that we're asked to consider biases and how these biases could potentially create barriers that would need to be intentionally addressed and removed. And those barriers could range from institutional barriers, systemic biases, and barriers. And then it's intentionally draws our attention to addressing and removing those biases which create learning barriers and barriers toward belonging. There's also a shift from teacher-centered to learner-centered, whether that be in the language, in the action, in the why, the what, and the how. Ultimately, it's creating more agency. And we're asked to look at student ownership, their agency. Things become more student driven with collaboration. And it's really important for student executive function and the metacognition alongside that authentic identity growth, being really learner centered in the way that we approach the day in our schools. The third thing is that we really lean into collective learning and interdependence, and perhaps shift ever so slightly away from that individual expertise. In fact, one of the things that we want to come back to is to talk about this idea of expert learner for the end, right? So how do we do all this? There are considerations in place. So if we think about the the considerations on how we might intentionally plan for that engagement, representation, action, and expression with consideration to identity, for example, how might we affirm learner identities and assets? Two of my favorites in that column. How do we intentionally emphasize the role of belonging in teaching and learning? How do we bring that to the forefront? How are we already doing that? And then how might we intentionally center joy and play? I love that one. How might we, or how do we amplify and champion the cultural variabilities of joy and of play? How do we value different cultural ways of knowing? How do we consider different cultural perceptions? Think of how this supports us in all of us in nurturing global citizenship within our school communities. And for that action expression, how do we center expression that's been historically silenced or ignored for certain groups of individuals, whether that be gender, culture, language, etc., etc. The fourth thing that really got me excited was this language consideration of expert learner. We hear that all the time. We do all of this so that we can create and support the development of expert learners. But there was a suggestion, and there's a language consideration, that perhaps this term suggests some elitism. Perhaps it is confusing across different cultures or languages, and perhaps, or might it, kind of downplay the importance of collective learning and that interdependence that we really want to start putting at the forefront. So these are 4 things that really piqued my. I have a QR code here for you. If your interest has been piqued, there are a wide range of resources in the full article. Scan this QR code, have a read for yourself, look at the resources, look at the rationale in depth behind these proposed changes, and share back with us what you're most intrigued about.